Montana Territory, 1883. The land stretched wide and wild beneath the endless sky, stitched with pine-covered ridges, golden prairie grass, and the bones of mountains in the distance. It was a place made for men who didn't break easy, and horses that never did. Garrett McAllister stood at the edge of the corral, boots planted firm in the dirt, arms crossed over his broad chest. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the dust, and the black stallion inside moved like a thundercloud on four legs, powerful, unpredictable, and brimming with fury. Midnight. Garrett had bought the horse 2 years earlier from a traveling Sioux trader, who'd spoken few words but left Garrett with a knowing smile and a warning. He'll choose no master. Only death or a woman's heart will tame him. Garrett had laughed back then. He wasn't laughing now. The stallion charged again, teeth flashing, hooves cracking against the rail. The cowboy inside, number 30 by Garrett's count, yelped as he was thrown skyward like a rag doll, landing hard in the dirt with a groan and a cloud of dust. Garrett exhaled through his nose and rubbed the bridge of his nose with a gloved hand. Another failure, another bruised ego and busted rib. That made 30 men, 30 professionals, each one thrown off before the second ride. "Damn thing's got the devil in him," muttered the foreman, Clay Dobbs, leaning on the gate with a spittoon cup in hand. "I say we put a bullet in it before someone breaks their neck." Garrett's eyes hardened. "He's not a problem. He's a challenge," Clay snorted. "A 1,000-acre challenge with a death wish." That night Garrett sat in the smoky warmth of the Deadwood Saloon, a whiskey in one hand and his pride burning in the other. The air buzzed with poker games and half-hearted laughter. Every rancher in the county had heard about Midnight, and every one of them had a story about how they could have tamed him if they'd only tried. Garrett pushed back his chair,
stood tall and raised his glass. "Listen up," he barked,
voice carrying over the din. "I've got a black stallion that's thrown 30 cowboys, maybe more. I'll give $1,000 to the man or woman who can train him." Silence fell like a dropped knife. Eyes darted. A few men chuckled nervously. One old-timer coughed into his drink. No one stood. Garrett downed the rest of his whiskey and left them with their fear. The next morning, as he nursed a second cup of coffee and stared across the frost-tipped valley, a young stable hand approached with a letter in hand. "It came in on the stage, sir. Postmarked from Philadelphia." Garrett took the envelope, brow furrowed. The handwriting was unfamiliar. He slid it open, read the first few lines, and went stiff as barnwood. "Dear Mr. McAllister, I received your letter and will be arriving on the 3rd of November to begin our life together as husband and wife. I trust your home is in order, and I look forward to starting anew beside you. Sincerely, Eleanor Whitmore." Garrett stared at the signature. Heart-sinking, Eleanor Whitmore, a name he only barely remembered, a letter he must have written months ago during a night of too much whiskey and too little sense. He had ordered himself a mail order. Bride, and she was on her way. November 3rd. Arrived colder than expected. A sharp wind blew down from the Bitterroot Mountains, rattling the porch boards of McAllister Ranch and tossing dust devils across the yard. Garrett McAllister stood by the hitching post, arms folded, hat pulled low, silently cursing his past self. He hadn't sent another letter to stop her. Hadn't had the guts. He told himself she'd take one look at the place and turn right back around. Then the stagecoach rolled in. It kicked up a cloud of dust as it creaked to a stop in front of the general store. A small crowd gathered, curious to see who'd be foolish enough to answer a mail-order ad from the most hard-headed man in the valley. The door swung open. A woman stepped out. She was not what Garrett expected. Slim but not fragile, she wore a cream traveling dress dusted from the road, and her pale blonde hair was tucked neatly under a modest bonnet. Her face was calm, unreadable, eyes sharp as a hawk's but quiet with patience. She glanced around once, then straightened her posture like someone about to walk into a courtroom, not a cow town. With a small bag in hand, she stepped down from the coach. Garrett took a step forward, and she walked toward him without hesitation. "Mr. McAllister?" she asked, voice smooth and clear. "I reckon," he said, still squinting. "You're Eleanor Whitmore?" "I am," she replied, offering a gloved hand. He didn't take it. "There's been a mistake. She didn't blink. No, there hasn't. Garrett scratched the back of his neck. Look, I must have written that letter after a bottle too many. I didn't expect you to actually come. I don't need a wife. Her chin tilted upward just slightly. Then why did you send for one? Garrett opened his mouth, then closed it. That ain't the point. It is to me, she said softly. I sold everything I had to get on that coach. I left behind a life I barely survived, all for a promise made by a man I thought had some honor. The townsfolk were watching now. Clay Dobbs leaned against a post, chewing on a toothpick, trying not to smirk. You don't understand, Garrett muttered. No, Ellie said, lifting her skirts and walking past him. You don't. She didn't wait for an invitation. She headed straight for his horse hitched out front. A great gleaming black animal, taller than most, eyes flashing with suspicion. The moment she approached, Midnight tossed his head and pawed the ground. Everyone held their breath. Eleanor didn't flinch. She stopped just shy of the reins and slowly raised her hand. Easy, she murmured, as if speaking to an old friend. To everyone's disbelief, Midnight didn't bolt. He sniffed her fingers. Snorted once, then stood still. Garrett stared like he'd seen a ghost. Eleanor turned to him calmly. I don't need to be your wife, Mr. McAllister, but I will stay, on one condition. Garrett blinked. What condition? She brushed dust from her sleeve. Let me train your stallion. A long silence followed. Then Clay laughed behind them. You're kidding, right? That horse nearly killed a man last week. Ellie didn't even look at him. Garrett studied her. You're serious. I am. He narrowed his eyes. Why? Her expression softened, but her voice remained steady. Because you made a promise. And so did I. And because something tells me that horse doesn't need to be broken. Just understood. Garrett chewed that over for a long moment, then nodded once. You've got 1 week, he said. Then we'll see. Ellie smiled faintly and turned back toward the horse. Midnight watched her, still and waiting. Eleanor rose before dawn. The Montana sky was still dark, dusted with stars, and the frost had settled silver on the fence posts. Most of the ranch hands were still asleep, their snores drifting from the bunkhouse like distant bears in hibernation. But Eleanor was wide awake, coat wrapped tight, boots crunching lightly over frozen ground. She moved like someone with purpose, not rushed, not afraid, but certain. Midnight stood in the corral, alert and watching. He didn't charge or rear. He just watched her, ears forward, body still as a statue. Garrett stood on the porch, coffee in hand, arms crossed. He'd been there since before she arrived, silently observing from the shadows like a man trying not to care, but already too invested to stop. She didn't speak. Not right away. Instead, she stepped to the edge of the corral and leaned against the rail. Then she waited. 5 minutes, 10, no movement. Just wind and breath. Then softly she said, Good morning. Midnight flicked one ear. Nothing more. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a sugar cube. I won't force you, she said. You've had enough of that, haven't you? She tossed the sugar gently into the dirt near the center of the corral and stepped back. Midnight stared at it for a long time, unmoving. Eventually, he lowered his head and took a few steps forward. Not toward her, just toward the sugar. He licked it up and looked at her again. She smiled, then walked away without another word. That became the pattern. No ropes. No saddles. No shouting, just time, respect, stillness. She would show up, speak gently, never ask too much. Each day, Midnight came closer. Each day, he gave her a little more. By the 4th day, he let her brush his mane. By the 5th, he followed her halfway across the corral without a lead. And by the 6th, he rested his great head against her shoulder. Clay Dobbs wasn't happy about it. He stood by the barn that night, spitting tobacco into the dirt and grumbling to the ranch hands. That woman's witchcraft, I tell you. Ain't natural. 30 men couldn't do a damn thing with that horse. And she walks in like some preacher's daughter and turns him into a puppy. She's good, one of the younger cowboys muttered. Clay's jaw tightened. She's dangerous, and Garrett's blind if he don't see it. He tossed down his tin cup and stalked off into the dark. That evening, Garrett confronted her near the paddock. "You're doing it," he said simply. Eleanor didn't stop brushing Midnight's coat. "Doing what?" "Succeeding." She looked at him then, eyes curious. He stepped closer. "I didn't think it was possible." "Hell, I figured you'd pack up and leave after the first day," Eleanor smirked. "You don't know women very well, do you, Mr. McAllister?" "Guess not." There was a long pause. Then he asked, quieter this time, "Why are you really here, Ellie?" She paused, then looked him square in the eye. "Because I got tired of being invisible. In Philadelphia, I was a burden. A spinster. A woman who read too much and married too late. I lost my family, my house, everything. But I didn't lose me. I came west because I figured if I was going to rebuild a life, I wanted to build it where things still mattered. Where work and grit count for more than corsets and tea parties." Garrett didn't respond right away. Then, softly, he said, "You're not invisible here." She gave him a look. Part gratitude. "Part warning. Good," she said, stroking Midnight's muzzle. "Because I'm not planning to leave." The next few days brought a rare kind of peace to the McAllister ranch. Mornings began with the low hum of cattle and the hiss of coffee on the stove. The ranch hands no longer laughed at Eleanor's presence. Instead, they watched her with quiet respect. Even the older cowboys started tipping their hats when she passed, murmuring, "Ma'am." She hadn't asked for anyone's approval. She'd simply earned it. Midnight had transformed under her care. No longer the wild-eyed beast who lashed out at anything that moved, he now trotted across the corral to meet her each morning like an eager student. She still hadn't saddled him, she wasn't rushing things, but she spoke to him like an equal, not a thing to be mastered. And Garrett? Garrett had changed too. He started rising earlier, lingering longer by the paddock, listening more than talking. He asked her quiet questions over supper, about her childhood, her books, her dreams. She found herself answering more than she expected, and asking her own questions too. He was sharp when he wanted to be, unexpectedly kind, and always steady. There were calluses on his hands, and something scarred in his heart. But Eleanor was beginning to see beneath it. That scared her more than she cared to admit, but not everyone welcomed the change. Clay Dobbs was growing restless. He watched the way Garrett looked at Eleanor. The way the other men listened to her. How Midnight followed her like a loyal hound while Clay couldn't get within 10 feet without a snort and a kick of dirt. He'd worked under Garrett for 5 years and been quietly certain the ranch would one day be his, or at least that Garrett would always listen to him. But this woman from the East, with her soft voice and spine of steel, was turning everything upside down. One night, in the shadow of the barn, Clay met with 2 ranch hands who hadn't taken to Eleanor's presence. Men who resented being shown up by a lady in a dress. "You see what's happening, don't you?" Clay growled. "She's got him wrapped around her little finger. Next thing you know, she'll be running the place, and we'll be the ones packing up," one of the men grunted. "So what? She's got the horse calm." "That's more than any of us managed," Clay sneered. "She ain't training that horse. She's bewitching it. And Garrett's too damn blind to see it." He spat into the dirt. Eyes flashing. "That ends tonight." Just before midnight, under a new moon sky, Clay crept to the corral. Midnight slept standing, head low, tail flicking lazily. A soft whistle from the barn owl was the only sound for miles. Clay unlatched the gate slowly, glancing back toward the bunkhouse. No movement, he slipped inside, but the moment his boot hit the dirt, Midnight's head snapped up. "Easy, boy," Clay hissed. "Not here to hurt you." He reached for a coiled rope at his side, just enough to startle the stallion, maybe send him off running into the hills for a few days. A little accident to remind Garrett that some horses and some women didn't belong on this ranch. But Midnight reared suddenly, sensing danger before it happened. His hooves struck the fence with a deafening crack. Lights snapped on in the bunkhouse. A shout rang out. "Someone's in the corral!" Clay cursed and darted into the shadows, disappearing into the trees just as Garrett came running. Rifle in hand, Midnight was rattled but uninjured, trotting in circles, his breath wild and heavy. Garrett turned, jaw tight. Voice sharp, "Get Eleanor." 10 minutes later, she arrived, wrapped in a shawl, boots unlaced, hair falling from its pins. She didn't say a word. She stepped into the corral, held out her hand and waited. Midnight slowed. He trotted once, then twice, then came to her, pressing his nose against her palm like a frightened child. Eleanor looked to Garrett, her voice calm but firm. Someone tried to spook him. Garrett nodded. I know, and I'll find out who. Their eyes met in the moonlight, trust exchanged without a word. But both of them knew one thing for certain now. This wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was war. The next morning broke with tension thick in the cold Montana air. The corral fence bore fresh cracks where Midnight's hooves had struck it the night before. Eleanor stood beside him, running a calming hand along his neck. He was jumpy, skittish like he had been in the early days, but he hadn't regressed entirely. He still trusted her. Garrett had barely slept. He'd been up since before dawn, walking the perimeter, speaking in clipped tones to the ranch hands. No one confessed. Of course they didn't. But Garrett wasn't a fool. He knew Clay Dobbs. Clay had worked under him for 5 years. Loyal, hard-working, but always with a mean streak buried just below the surface. And lately, that mean streak had been rising. He found Clay in the feed barn, tossing hay bales like nothing had happened. You were near the corral last night, Garrett said flatly. Clay didn't even look up. Can't prove that. No, but I can sure as hell trust my gut. Clay dropped the bale, turned to face him. You gonna take her word over mine now? Some fancy-pants mail-order bride who waltzed in like she owns the place? Garrett stepped forward. She's done more for this ranch in 2 weeks than you have in 2 years. That hit the mark. Clay's eyes darkened. She's got you wrapped around her little finger, he spat. You think she's here for you? She's here for your land, your name, your money, Garrett's jaw clenched. You're fired. You don't mean that. I mean every damn word. His voice was low and final. Pack your things and get off my land by sundown. Clay's glare could have cut through iron. This ain't over, he said. Garrett watched him go, but the uneasy feeling in his chest didn't fade. That night, the storm rolled in. The wind came first, whistling through the trees, then the clouds, low and black, curling over the mountains like smoke. Eleanor stood on the porch, shawl wrapped tight, watching the sky. She had a sick feeling in her gut, the kind that comes when instinct stirs before the facts catch up. Garrett joined her, lighting a lantern. We'll need to bring the horses in early, he said. Don't want 'em spooked when it breaks. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the ridge. I don't trust Clay, she murmured. Garrett glanced sideways. Neither do I. Lightning cracked in the distance. Thunder rolled seconds later. Then came the shout. The gate's open! Garrett and Eleanor both bolted for the corral. The storm hit just as they reached it, cold rain slicing sideways. The corral door swung wide in the wind, and Midnight was gone. They saddled horses in minutes, Eleanor climbing up without hesitation. Garrett gave her a look, half worried, half impressed. You don't have to come. Yes, she said, tightening her reins. I do. They rode fast into the storm, hooves pounding against the muddy trail. Lightning flashed across the ridgeline, just long enough to show a shape moving along the trees. Midnight. But he wasn't running wild. He was limping. Eleanor's heart dropped. They found him tangled in a thicket down by Widow's Creek. One leg scraped and bloodied, nostrils flaring with panic. Garrett dismounted and tried to approach, but Midnight reared, screaming. Eleanor slid off her horse, held out her hands. Shh, it's me, boy. He shook, sides heaving, hooves stomping. But she stepped closer, voice soft and steady. It's all right. I've got you. I won't let you fall. Midnight lowered his head, just enough. She knelt beside him in the wet grass, working quickly with a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat. The cut wasn't deep, but it was enough to keep him from walking far. Garrett tossed her a rope. We'll have to lead him back slow. Lightning crashed again, this time closer. Eleanor gripped Midnight's mane, her hand steady on his neck. We're going home, she whispered. Hours later, soaked to the bone, they reached the ranch. Midnight limped into the barn, exhausted but alive. Eleanor sank onto a hay bale, hair wet and tangled. Cheeks flushed from the cold. Garrett crouched in front of her, hands on his knees, watching her like he'd never seen her before. "You saved him." She shook her head. "We saved him." "No," he said, quiet and firm.
You did what no man could do.
"You stayed." Their eyes met, and something passed between them that neither rain nor thunder could wash away. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world slick with dew and silence. A golden mist rolled off the hills, and birds sang like they hadn't just been huddled in terror the night before. The McAllister ranch stood intact, the fences mended, the barn still upright. But something in the air had changed, calmer, steadier, like the land itself had exhaled. Inside the barn, Midnight lay resting on a thick bed of hay, bandaged and fed, breathing deep and even. Eleanor sat beside him, gently stroking his forelock with one hand and sipping hot coffee with the other. Garrett stood nearby, watching her from the shadows, hat in hand. He'd never seen a horse trust anyone like that before. Not a trainer. Not even him. Midnight had given her everything. Not out of fear or force, but something else entirely. The same thing. Garrett realized he was starting to feel. Later that day, word came in from the sheriff in town. Clay Dobbs had been caught sneaking out of the territory with stolen supplies from the ranch. He'd confessed to opening the corral gate the night before, claiming the horse deserved to run free, not be owned by some lady who thought she was better than everyone. The sheriff asked if Garrett wanted to press charges. Garrett only said, "No need." He already lost what mattered. That evening, as the sun dipped low and set fire to the horizon, Garrett found Eleanor in the paddock. She had changed into a soft blue dress she'd found tucked away in one of the trunks she'd brought from Philadelphia. Nothing fancy, but it caught the golden light just right. She was brushing down one of the mares, her face calm, content. He walked up slowly, clearing his throat. "You know," he said, "that stallion's been on this land for 2 years. I thought he'd be the thing that broke me. Turns out, he just needed the right person," she smiled. "We all do." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that says more than words. Then Garrett took off his hat, looked her dead in the eye. "I've been thinking about that letter I wrote." "The one that brought you here?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Whiskey-fueled, wasn't it?" He grinned. "Yeah, but maybe it wasn't such a bad letter after all." She tilted her head. "Are you saying you don't regret it?" "I'm saying—" He stepped closer. "I might have written it drunk, but I mean it sober now." Eleanor's breath caught. Garrett reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring, simple silver. "Carved with a vine design, my ma's," he said. "She'd have liked you." He held it out. "Eleanor Whitmore, will you stay? Not because of a letter or a deal or a horse, but because I'm a better man with you than I ever was without." She looked down at the ring, then back at him. "You're still stubborn," she said. "Always. You snore." He laughed. "Guilty," she smiled, eyes misting just slightly. "Then yes, I'll stay." They married the following Sunday, beneath a cottonwood tree at the edge of the ranch, with Midnight standing proud in the background like a sentinel blessing their union. The whole town came, curious and cheering, bringing food, gifts, and wide-eyed wonder. And for years to come, folks would tell the story of the wild stallion no man could tame, of the rich rancher who dared anyone to try, and of the mail-order bride who didn't just tame the beast, she taught it how to love.